And thank you for joining today's ICTR Enrichment Series presentation. Before we begin, I would like to start off by reminding everyone that this event is recorded. The recording will be posted on the ICTR website by the end of the week. Click on the chat at the bottom of your screen to find the ICTR website link where today's presentation will be posted. I will be adding that link a little further into our session just to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to see it. Also, we will reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes or so for questions. Please add your questions into the QA feature as they come to mind. And as you leave the web presentation, we invite you to take a few moments to complete a survey and let us know how we can improve our presentations and what topics you're interested in. Our guest speaker for this ICTR Enrichment Seminar is Dr. Rana Quraishi. Dr. Quraishi is the Director of New Ventures here at UMB. New Ventures is an initiative that brings together management expertise, business information, formation strategy, physical office and laboratory space, and early stage capital for new startups based on university technology. Over the past 3 years, New Ventures has launched 3 companies with UMB scientific co-founders. The first was a CAR T-cell company, Living Pharma, which has been acquired. The second was a laparoscopic surgical device company, Surgigen Inc., which received strategic investment from a large medical device company and was ultimately acquired by that company. And the third is Isoprene, which has a $2 million Cyber Direct Phase 2 grant. So with that, please now help me join in welcoming Dr. Quraishi. Dr. Quraishi.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Wanda, can you hear me? Is everything good?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I am here to talk about our new ventures in the context of the financial markets and why we do what we do. So on May 10th, there was another seminar, which is recorded, which is why I'm bringing it up, because some of the things that we do were covered by Phil Robolato and Jim Hughes. They discussed a lot of the programs that we have on innovation and entrepreneurship at the university. So I didn't want to be repetitive, but some of the things are relevant. So I wanted to direct you to that recording. And so in my talk, I'm going to focus more again on why we have these programs in the context of the financial markets. And then I will discuss some of the learning initiatives that we've started. That's really at the very end. But I was hoping that that might also generate some discussion about some of the ways in which we could help potential entrepreneurs here. Thank you. So for the next slide, this is a slide those who were here in the previous seminar with Phil and Jim might have seen before. Ooh, one thing is here. Can you see the pointer also, Wanda? With my mouse? Well, doesn't.
Yes, yes, I see it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So UM Ventures has sort of 4 different functions in the group. We have intellectual property, licensing, startups, and investing. And so the question is, why do we do this at a university? So going to the next slide, the reason that we exist is that basically earlier on, well, since World War II, the US government has been the major sponsor of research at American universities. But industrial innovation from the universities into the private sector was kind of done in a haphazard way. There were no organized points of contact. If you wanted to commercialize a technology, you kind of already had to have networked into the group. And it worked better earlier because in areas like defense and engineering, there were already these networks and contacts because obviously of World War II and other things. But then as time went on and as you had the emergence of new sectors like technology, and then eventually of biotech, where patents and things were really important, this again became an issue. So in 1980, the Bayh-Dole Act was passed, and that organized and transformed the relationship between how academic research works and then how that work is transferred to industrial innovation. And this was particularly important for the life sciences because we are a patent-driven kind of business. So the Bayh-Dole Act allowed universities to have title to intellectual property from federally funded research. And at the same time, it encouraged universities to license that IP exclusively or non-exclusively to promote commercialization. So that obviously then encouraged the development of tech transfer offices. And this was really beneficial because people knew exactly where to go if they wanted to license a technology. And so you can see that is very, very logical for why these first two groups, the licensing, the intellectual property group, and the licensing group of our function exist. So the intellectual property group, we have attorneys when you have an idea that you think might be, might be something that could be a patent, you disclose to us, and then our patent attorneys file patents. We have the licensing group then that takes those pieces of intellectual property, it markets them to a broad audience, and people come to us and negotiate licenses around the intellectual property that they're interested in. And that has been a really successful and amazing function. So then you might wonder why startups and investing are important functions. Well, that's partly because the nature of how business and biotech is done has changed over the last, I would say, 20 years or so. Initially, pharma was very involved in early stage biotech. They had large campuses in several cities in the country where early stage research was being done. But that has ceded way to basically innovation being done through small scale startups, and small scale startups are financed in the current environment via biotech. I'm going to specifically focus on biotech here. So biotech-focused venture capital firms. That doesn't mean pharma isn't involved. It does get involved, and it partners often with universities still, but not as much as it used to. And more and more, and even pharma will seed startups and then eventually acquire the startups. So pharma tends to get involved later in biotech now. And so you have this early sort of venture funds. And as I go through this talk, I think it'll become clear why universities need to be able to support the earlier stage technology to get venture interested in those technologies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our group. This is just some of the people in our group. I'm really focusing on Linda Petrillo and Alistair Mackay for this audience, I hope, because with the ICTR, as the goal is to fund translational research, hopefully some of these technologies that are funded will then be able to move forward. And so we're really talking about very early stage here. And one of the best programs we have for funding early stage technologies that have, gotten out of the research phase is through the MII funds that the state has. And Alistair Mackay is the site miner for these funds. We'll go into the funds with a little more detail toward the end. But what I was hoping was that, as we develop pipeline, that, we can get more and more involved and get more companies eventually formed by taking technology or even licenses done by taking technologies forward through the MII program. So I wanted to make sure that you knew who Linda and Alistair were. And then some of the other people will come up later. Mary Morris runs a program called the Baltimore Fund. She's not part of our group specifically, but the Baltimore Fund is developing programs and resources to keep companies in the Baltimore area. So that's just another person you should be aware of. And there are several other members of our group. They are consultants and advisors, and some of their names will come up. But please contact me and if you're interested in learning a little more about specific individuals in our group. So the real thing I want to approach is, what are some of the key issues around developing drugs, and who would take on the kind of risk that's involved in developing drugs? So if you think about it, developing a drug uses money with no return for 7 to 10 years. Most of the things that you start developing fail en route. So probably about 95% of things that start out on day one failed somewhere on the route. And by failure, I mean they can't eventually attract enough interest for, say, large funding. They might have a formulation problem as they're trying to develop the drug. They might have toxicity. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why things fail. In addition, there's a really complex regulatory pathway that you have to get done and get done right. So you have preclinical toxicity studies, you have longer term toxicity studies, you have formulation issues, and you have to be able to make sure that you're able to make your drug material in a facility that can be used for humans, and then you have very long clinical trials. So these are all of the very big complexities that you're sort of dealing with while you're basically using money and having no revenue. And then the other thing is when you do get to clinical trials, suppose that you even do have a positive clinical trial and then you go for a larger phase 3 trial. By this time, you could have spent well over $100 million and have no product if the data has been blinded. So when the data is released, if the clinical trial it has not been a success, you have no product. So a blogger once said, it's like planning for a wedding and a funeral at the same time and not knowing what will happen. And that is very much what it's like. And that's kind of the way you have to think and plan. The other thing is competition can come from different fields. So if you're developing a small molecule, but an amazing discovery happens in immuno-oncology, which is a really great thing for the patient, it can though limit what you can do with your company. Then the other thing is that, you know, you're dealing with venture money, which is basically a pretty small universe of funders, even though it is quite a lot of money. And so it's hard to get the focus of venture. But venture are the people who fund this, because venture capitalists are the ones who are willing to take on the kind of risk that I have just described to you. So how do you engage with venture capitalists? So you form a company, and when you form a company, you and your co-founders will determine how initially on day one you divide the shares of your company. And then as time goes on and you need money, basically what you're doing is you're exchanging pieces of your ownership for capital. And that's kind of how you work. And so over time, you may actually be giving up a lot of control over your company and also not end up being having a significant ownership interest at all. But that usually is okay because, you know, if you end up owning, say, 2% of $1 billion company, that is still a good thing. So when venture capitalists make these kind of investments, the question is, how do they do it? How do you even approach something where you're talking about a 7 to 10 year time horizon? So obviously the first thing, which I've mentioned before, is they're looking for a very high return. And the other thing is that investors also want to make staged investments. And that's why you see a seed round, series A round, series B round, and so on, because they want to have a pause button at every step to see whether, okay, you've got a seed round of funding, have you met what we've asked you to do? If you have, then you know you're doing well. Let's also look at how the financial markets are right now. Do we have money? Let's see so they look at the market, at what people are saying about biotech. And so there are pause buttons along the way. So that's good and bad, because if you're doing very well and the markets are aligned in your favor, you can get very good pricing and your company can be worth a lot. However, as if you're in an environment like the current environment and the markets are absolutely terrible, you know, it's going to be really hard, even though you may have nothing about your science or the technology may have changed. It's just the volatility and the sort of, you know, fashion at the top in the financial markets that's going to affect what you're able to get done. But that's how investors look, and they like to make staged investments, which can be very good for the company or sometimes bad for the company. Now, as you do this, as I mentioned, as you do this, as I mentioned, you are still, you're becoming less and less of an owner in your company, but your company hopefully is making more and more progress. And so it's becoming worth more and more. And if you are in a really, really hot technology, someone might be willing to acquire you at any one of these stages. And usually that acquisition will be via a pharma company. But that doesn't always happen. And so you really have to, when you plan, expect that you're going to be continuing to finance and that you're going to be doing everything right to be able to continue to finance. The other thing, though, that happens is that even though as an academic, you might be the founder of the company for a whole slew of reasons, you may not be able to run the company. And often you may not even be able to run the company when it starts or even have that significant a role because you have another job, you're at the university. And then also the company may change how it operates over time. So if you have, say, a small molecule company and you're getting toward clinical trials and formulation is an issue, obviously the type of management you'll have in place is management that's seasoned with dealing with that issue. So the nature of the company changes over time, the ownership changes over time, and if you're doing very well, you may get acquired early, but eventually at some point, usually at some point when there's clinical data, the approach is to sell to a large pharma company that can fund a later stage clinical trial, or if you've been able to do the clinical trials yourself, to market and distribute your product. So ultimately, the exits are usually through pharma companies. Sometimes when the markets are good, you can have a public company trading earlier with sort of public company management that knows how to do all of the reporting and things like that. But at the end of the day, we're going to really focus on the early sort of stuff here. So as I mentioned, these rounds are staged. And so what is it? How do you stage these rounds? So the seed round is generally the first money in. It's generally not institutional money, so it may or may not be a venture fund. There are some funds that invest in seed, many funds actually, but it's hard to get. And the idea is to validate the concept and do initial proof of concept studies. And things like, and because it is so hard to attract venture funding, that's why we have programs like the MII and the SBIR program. And generally, we're talking here about 100,000 to 2 million. This is the only thing I'm going to throw out any numbers for because the numbers change depending on the technology and the time. But generally, that's sort of the seed round. So that's kind of where we can work and help you. And where I mentioned with Alistair on the MII, it is really a great thing that the state has. And it's, free money, basically. Then when you get to Series A, that's when the first institutional round typically comes in from venture capitalists. And you usually have a lead. You have to find somebody who will be a lead investor, somebody who's really willing to take on the task of creating a term sheet, valuing your company, and often they'll want a seat on the board. Now, again, these are the hardest types of financings to get if you're far away from venture. And so we do have some programs like the Momentum Fund, which will help you round out your offering. So if you have someone who's interested, but they can't quite commit enough, the Momentum Fund can help. And it's always a really good idea if you've gotten involved with the MII program and things to also be talking to people in the Momentum Fund at the university as you're starting to go for your Series A. And then I'm not going to continue because we don't have enough time, but then you have these later rounds of capital for clinical trials and so on. And then you can also, if you are doing well and have great clinical data, there's the potential for doing sort of debt financing at various points. Now, how does this all fit into the context of the return for the risk? So if you look at the S&P, the average annualized return for the S&P, and I'm just going to throw out 8 to 10%. This is the actual number from from the data. And so you can see that that's the return sort of on a basket of at market things. And then when you look at venture, you see that the National Bureau of Economic Research has calculated that venture capitalists have looked and have generally received about a 25% return on average. Now that number includes all venture, and most of the time, while I haven't looked into the details, I would expect that it's weighted by the whatever's available in the market. So it's kind of toward the larger side of venture, the later stage of venture overall, that 25% comes from. And seed and early stage venture investors expect an even higher return. And it's also difficult to get their focus if you already aren't sort of networked in. I've attached the names here of some of the early venture funds if you wanted to look them up. And on another slide, I have a link to another blog that has done a really nice job of summarizing a lot more of the early seed and early stage venture funds for those of you who want to look at that. And then fortunately, I'd say though that in around here, it's really, really important to try to use the public money that's available, going through the MII program and the SBIR federal program. And again, the point of contact there would be going through Alistair for the MII program. And if any of you want to reach out to me on the SBIR, we'd be happy to help because we are very familiar with that, having managed one. So that's kind of how, you know, the return expectations fit in biotech. And you're going to want people, you're going to want to remember that investors are only going to invest in you if they think that your company has that kind of return potential. So some technologies are just never really going to get venture funding. One of the issues that we have is when we have a lot of, say, technologies around ER medical devices and trauma, where you might have maybe a few hundred patients or a few thousand patients every year, but it's going to be life-saving for them. How do you actually finance a product like that, even though it has a really great unmet medical need? So that's just something to always keep in mind. And the more you can use public money for those kind of things, the lower the risk is for anyone who would invest in it. And there are other pools of investors who will invest in some of these projects, which we can talk about at another point in another seminar, I think. So anyway, going back to the stage investments in the context then of risk. What does this mean for risk? So basically, when you look at seed investors, I'm just trying to get my arrow here. When you look at seed investors, they are the ones who are coming in very, very early. And what generally their approach is to invest small amounts of money in lots of companies, but they're really, really expecting a high return. They're expecting if they put in $1, let's say something like $100 in every company they invest. And the idea, but the idea is that, you know, they're thinking that only 2 to 3% of the companies will survive. So I need a really high return from the ones that survive. And they're also looking at a very, very long time horizon, which is 7 to 10 years. So it's a pretty scary place for them. And they really want to be where they know this stuff, which is a concern. Series A investors are, on the other hand, coming in a little bit later. They're writing bigger checks on more information. They then correspondingly may not expect as large a return. They may think, okay, well, if I put in $1 and I'll get $10 or $15 back, and you know, maybe 20 to 30% of the companies will survive to the end. That's not so bad. And I have some data, and I have, you know, maybe some idea from their business plan when they're going to go to the FDA, or maybe they already have a little bit of, you know, feedback by looking at other companies in the space who are doing similar things. They can make more nuanced decisions. And so they're taking a lower risk, and their exit time also is a bit shorter. It could be 4 to 8 years, let's say. So it's shorter than what the seed investors look in. So it becomes less risky. And then when you go on to later stage investors, they're writing even bigger checks in bigger amounts, and they're expecting maybe 3 to 5 times return, because they're thinking maybe 65% of our companies will survive, and this company has done quite a bit already, so it's going to exit and you know, sell itself to a pharma or whatever in 2 to 3 years. So our chances, and here you can really kind of get a much better calculation of what your outlook will be. So that's kind of how you look at seed, Series A and Series later stage investors, just in terms of going through how they're thinking about risk. And it really helps to ponder that a bit. And And here's where I've attached, this is the link from a blog where they have summarized some of the top seed funds in the business in biotech, if you want to go in there and look at that. Now, this I wasn't sure if I should put in because it's published data from a research site. And the only reason I put it in was because if you look here, you will see that the returns on what they call the early stage venture capital is, can be pretty high compared to, say, the returns on, the overall market. But I think for our purposes, we're really early. So even this is later. So I just put it in there so you would know where to get some information and start looking if you wanted to. Okay. So what are some of the fundamental issues around this kind of financing? We've already discussed what investors look for, but what goes wrong here in a broad market? So first of all, you have to think of biotech as kind of basically needing money all the time till they get a product on the market. And so anytime there's high interest rates and money becomes more expensive relative to other things, that is hard on biotech. Biotech companies have no products and no revenue for years. So they're really totally dependent on the financial markets to keep providing them with the cash they need. So any change in that financial environment for the negative makes it harder for biotech. And if you think about it, a biotech business is sort of converting cash into data, right? They're taking money from you, getting clinical data, and then if it's positive, using that information to get more money, to get more clinical data, till they can finally, have enough data to get approval for a drug. And then after that is when they start actually earning revenue. So it's always this trade-off between how much money you can get for the amount of data that you can provide with that money that's going on here. The other really important thing to keep in mind is that one of the problems is you always have to be very careful to raise enough money so that it's sufficient to get you to the next value inflection point. So if you said you're doing items A, B, C, and D for your seed round, you have to make sure you reach that. And similarly for the A round and so on. And you can see the importance of that in a business where paying as you go is not an option. You don't have sales from which you can pay for anything. So, and imagine if you ran short of money in the middle of a clinical trial, you would certainly burn all your bridges with the FDA and, just ruin a lot of credibility. So it's not a good idea. So in terms of planning, you always want to raise more because you don't know what the financial markets will be like. And you don't know what your data will look like. So it's always better to try to get more money rather than less. And there isn't really an option. And it's really interesting because, when you start reading reports, even from venture capitalists in this environment, they talk about cutting back. And they really, there's a certain amount you can cut back in a biotech company if you have funding and you have a staff and everything, but there's only so much. You're still losing value all the time. You're not able to sit still. And part of that is because you have a patent. So, your patent life stay is about 20 years and development time and getting to market takes about 10 of that. And so you have sort of a 10-year, 10 years to make money. And if you have to sit still just because of bad markets for a couple of years, that, your value has just gone down from the patent point of view by about 20%. So that's kind of, those are fundamental problems that just have to do with what's going on above us in the financial markets, keeping in mind that nothing has really changed about the science or the technology. Things may change, but that doesn't have to do with the financial market. So there's two things going on. There's all of this drama in the financial markets and what's going on with the science. And if nothing has changed in the science, you could still be drastically impacted and really not have too many choices, which is one of the reasons why you try to raise as much money if you happen to be in a good cycle. So that's those are the key points I wanted to make about the fundamental problems. I wasn't going to dwell so much on these, but given what's going on and Silicon Valley Bank and all of that, I just thought I would mention all these points. because this is not the greatest time. Oh, what happened there? Okay, I'm going backward. Okay. So those are some of the market related and risk related factors that happen in the market. The other thing is, though, that when you're looking for venture funding, there's sort of other types of things that limit the ability of some regions and to get funding, and why it's really important to kind of know about all of these other programs like the MII, the SBIR Momentum Fund, because it helps to bridge that gap. It also helps when the markets are doing stuff like this. You might have been able to get funding directly, but now at least you have an option of going into the MII program. So it kind of sort of helps level things out when the markets are being dramatic. But in terms of the overall VC markets, venture, even though there's a lot of money involved here, is managed by a relatively few number of people. If you think about them as the senior partners of all of the venture funds in biotech, then if you look at each space where they invest, you see that there's actually not that many people who are the ultimate approvers and who are the ones who have the power to put the firm's money at risk. And so that in itself kind of creates an issue because it's a small group of people. The other thing is that the industry tends to fund locally because it's easier for them to manage the investments. So California and Boston were where sort of a lot of the early tech sector and biotech sector emerged, and then that led into the tech sector emerged, and then that led into the biotech sector. So that's sort of naturally how this market developed, and the VCs also developed there. And VCs then tend to fund what and who they know and people who are within their network. The other thing that happens, though, in addition to that, because it's possible to, at least try to break in and meet people, and it works pretty well sometimes. But the other thing also that happens is that there's sort of this, there's a strong sort of trend investing thing. So there's overall an underfunding of not hot technologies, and these things can come together cumulative if you happen to have a really great but not hot at the moment technology and you're located in a distant geography. And by distant geography, I mean both in terms of the institutions that VCs prefer to work with and in terms of the actual physical geographic location. So there's kind of an underfunding. It's not that there isn't funding, it's just underfunding. And that's why it's better to de-risk your work as much as possible early and so that you're interacting from a position of more strength. And that's why I'm talking so much about some of these public funding options. The other thing that tends to happen also sometimes is that, VCs will tend to go back and forth. Like people might say, oh, well, everybody's investing in late stage, there's real opportunity in earlier stage, and then people will switch to earlier stage, and then they'll say, we're really excited about earlier stage. So there's this kind of rotation on the stage they invest in also. So I think so I've discussed all these points. And again, I think that, that we're not in that favorite technology. We have access and it's great, but it's also very important to take, to go with as much risk taken out of what you're marketing, and use as much of the facilities that are available in the state to take care of that. The other problem, though, that this kind of geographic concentration and this type of funding paradigm leads to is that there's also a lack of really seasoned managers, because in sort of the non-hot geographies, because if you're in biotech and you're a biotech manager, you know always that, your job is at risk, and failure is actually the ability to live and want to work in an environment where there's failure is one of the characteristics of people who become biotech managers. So, but they also need to be, by definition, in environments where it is possible for them to know what's going on, meet new companies, get the next job without blinking an eyelid. And that's where there's also a significant issue that's created by this kind of funding paradigm. And it's one of the reasons why we formed the New Ventures Initiative, which does allow, in select cases, for us to take on technologies and manage them in the interim and move companies forward. And I've attached a couple of links if you want to read more about some of the issues. There's a lot more out there. So now I just wanted to turn a little bit to some of the sources of the kind of public funding I've talked about. And again, I've already referred to this, but who our contact people are. So Linda, some of you may already know through the ICTR because she's 50% with the ICTR, but she also works on building relationships with foundations and some pharma companies that have programs that are looking for certain types of technologies. But I would hope that she would also be your feeder into Alistair, who is a site miner for the MII program. And the MII program has two phases. So there's sort of a technology validation phase, which you can use to de-risk your technology. And it's a 9-month program. You get about $115,000. And then you also are able to get up to $300,000 to launch your company. And I've attached the links here to the websites. And then in addition to that, we have, I had shown you pictures of Mark and Adam earlier, and we have something called the Center for Maryland Advanced Ventures, and there's funding there to develop certain types of technologies. And that particular process is a selective process. I will here. This is the group that's kind of involved in that. And there's an external group who reviews the technologies. But the idea here, and Phil discussed it in his March 22nd presentation, the idea here is to get technologies and validate them more, or perhaps transition them to a slightly different indication. So if we know that a particular technology has been worked on by a researcher who's an expert in a particular indication, but somebody comes to us who's interested in working with us to maybe develop it for a different type of indication, we can get some of the core experiments done. Mark and Adam can. And they will work with those technologies. And we've had some real successes with that. One of the technologies was licensed to Genie Life Sciences, which you could look up. They're doing, they're doing a clinical trial now, and there's several others. And in the future, if you want to hear more about these sorts of things, we can put together a more detailed program on this or in the SBIR and get SBIR program officers here as well. But basically, then the other programs are the SBIR programs, and those are federal programs where you can apply for in up to, from I would say $125,000 to $2 million. We have had some experience with that, so we can kind of let you know what our experience has been. We also have someone who has done our accounting because we're in the second phase of a $2 million phase 2 SBIR. So we could, we can help you troubleshoot if you wanted to do it through your own company, or if you wanted to work with us, that's also a possibility. So those are some of the programs that we have. There's more information on these programs in the other seminar that was on March 22nd of last year. And I really kind of wanted to get through the material that I've done so far. The rest of it is just kind of add-on stuff, because I'm assuming most of our companies aren't, or most of the companies that this audience is thinking about aren't there yet. But as I had mentioned, there is a Momentum Fund. And again, since this slide deck will be posted, you could take a look at this and also go to their website. And they work to help round out financings, but you do have to have some VC interest in addition to what they can do. So this is a summary of the Momentum Fund. And then, as I had mentioned, there's a Baltimore Fund, and there may be more things happening here, but it is an initiative to help companies stay in Baltimore. And then I finally just wanted to end with a couple of things that we're doing in terms of education and training around entrepreneurship. So we have two things right now. One is a life science specific entrepreneurship course. It's been on pause since COVID, but we'd like to start it again. It's very specific to biotech entrepreneurship, because if you try to learn information on the web, or even like go to Y Combinator, which has some great biotech training videos as well, but because they started out in tech, they kind of get they don't completely get sometimes the difference between the risk in the various series of financings. That's quite different from life sciences than from tech. they don't understand how you have to think of the market for biotech compared to the thinking of the market for technology, technology meaning IT type of technology. So our courses focus very specifically on that. And then we have right now something called the Presidential Entrepreneurial Fellowship for those of you with graduate students. It's a fellowship that's open across the university. It's open to law students. It's actually also open to the Smith School of Business. It's open to graduate students, medical students. So this year we have, for example, 9 fellows. You have to apply, and there's a stipend associated with it. It's $5,000. And the fellows spend about 4 months, and usually they stay on and they like to work on their own. It's really been a great experience for everyone. But the fellows work on specific projects for our company. So this year they're working on the economics of repurposing drugs, and also some of the science around repurposing drugs for Otter, which is Daryl Carter's company. And then the other project that they're doing on a medical device is this looking at how you can finance these very hard to finance, small market, but high unmet medical need type of medical devices. So that's what we have currently specifically right within our group. But we're thinking of expanding, and one of the things we're thinking of doing, which might help the local managerial climate, is to have sort of an entrepreneurship postdoc fellowship program where people go into a company. So they start with a company where they already become a manager. They become managers with local ties. And if we're able to develop this as a truly innovative program, I hope that it'll put UMB in this area on the map, because I really do think there's a big need for it. People are starting to think about it, but nobody has come up with a really good program. So we would like to, and we'd love your input on that. And then finally, the other thing we're trying to do is start a hopefully online training program. It's going to be sort of like a 3-month certificate course, although I'm not sure that the certificate part of it is that relevant. The idea would be to be pretty robust. We'd like to do it with the Smith School of Business so that, it's pretty rigorous in terms of how you would describe capital markets, biotech finance, venture. It would help in terms of writing a business plan, accounting and financials for biotechs, and things like business structure. So there would be modules on these things. And we'd love to get your input and see what you'd like included, whether you'd be interested in a course like that. We know that people don't always have 1 day a week to commit to something like that for a long term. So the idea might be that we could do it in modules. So it'd be a capital market module, business planning module, and so on. And we would keep it updated. So that's kind of the idea. I'd love to get your feedback on it. And, just to give you an example, of where this might be helpful. So one of the things I encounter is like, if you're forming a company, what should I do? An LLC or a C Corp? And so you ask lawyers, and around here, a lot of lawyers will say LLCs. But if you're not putting your personal money in, obviously that doesn't necessarily make sense if you're going to be raising funds right away. So we could lay out all of this, for example, as an example and how you work through that. So there's a lot of things you can do with this type of a training that is very practical. And I would love to get more feedback on that, and also on any other ideas you might have. And I think with that, I'll stop. So thank you very much. And, please reach out with any other points and questions that you have. Thanks. Wanda?
Thank you, Dr. Quraishi, for that presentation. That's wonderful. I don't see any questions in the QA feature. I don't see any coming in through the chat. So just for the moment, I think it's a great opportunity to introduce Linda Petrillo, who, as Dr. Quraishi had noted, has a role with the ICTR as well as the Office of Tech Transfer. Linda is our program manager for our pilot grants program in the ICTR, and she's been a wonderful asset for directing our pilot project awardees to the Office of Tech Transfer, and also just helping them identify the types of intellectual property that they may, that their project may lead to. So I'm going to go ahead and allow Linda, I'm just promoting her as a panelist here. So if any folks have any questions, but Linda, if you have a moment, if you could share your experiences with the ICTR and with your role.
Sure. Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Wanda, for the kind introduction. So I don't know actually who is here today, but probably a few of you already know me from the ATOP grant, and I hope so. But anyways, in addition to work, as Wanda was mentioned, as in the ICTR with the pilot grant, I also work in the Office of Technology Transfer and especially in the new venture team, but I'm also connected to the licensing office. So what I normally do is when you apply for the top grant or for any ICTR grant, actually, I will examine your grant application and check if there is anything that could be protected with the patent, with the copyright. And in general, I'm discussing all the applications that are posted, that are submitted through the ICTR, with both the licensing office and with Alastair, that is the MII SiteMinder that we have within our team in the new venture. And we will always see together if there is any possibility that we have available within the OTT office to advance more or to support your research. So the general things that I want to say is that it's always good for you to reach out to me or to Rana or anybody else at the Office of Technology Transfer if you never disclosed before, just to learn about all the process, what does it mean, especially if you are new in the campus or you are a new faculty and you are not really sure when you should be disclosing and how, for example, you can lead like your disclosure to kind of like advance your technology or invention and how to kind of like build a startup or have it a license, what are the options available for you. If you are interested in all those information, please reach out to me or anybody else in our office. In addition to that, and this is something that I want to underline always, if you think that you have a good idea, don't wait too much, don't sit on it too much before coming in our office and disclose it, because we will be able to support you since the early stage of your development of your disclosure of your technology, and we will be able to kind of like follow you and make sure that you do everything is right, everything you can do in order to have your technology moving forward and eventually have the opportunity to license it or to make a startup out of it. And I guess that's like everything I want to say. So I hope to hear back from you.
Thank you, Linda, for that. I do see a couple of questions that have appeared in our Q&A box here. So the first is an anonymous attendee. Is there a course or resource you would recommend for learning the process of putting drugs through the FDA regulatory approval?
I actually would not. Well, I mean, I think you can look on Y Combinator's website to see if there's a course or literature. The thing is that these things change quite a bit. So there are courses out there, but they become a little bit dated. And it also depends on the type of technology and who on the FDA gets to look at the technology. I'll give you an example. Like we have an oncology technology that would go to the FDA, and we, when you do a first stage 1 clinical trial, we're trying to do it for a basket of trials because, if you try to do it for a very specific cancer, it'll take you forever. And also the mechanism is general enough that it makes sense to do that. But you still have to think about what your ultimate indication is and make sure that that particular group in the FDA is aware of it. So there's a lot of logistics. If it's for a device, we have a consultant who might be able to help refer you to the right place. And if you wanted to follow up with me later, I could try to find something given your specific needs, but not a general course, no.
So the other question that's in the QA is, does an investigator have to form a company to receive funding, or can one have a patent as an inventor without a company to get funding?
If you're talking, the MII program does not start out with a company at all. In fact, it has to be pre-company. So it's a great place to start. And then, the next stage assumes company formation, but it's not really like you actually have to have a company. With the SBIR, you do have to have a company when you get the SBIR, but when you initially when you initially start applying, you don't have to have a company. So if you are seriously interested in doing that, please come and talk to us, and we can help you, sort of figure out what you should be doing next. But with the MII program, definitely not, and with the SBIR, not necessarily till you actually get the funding. Then it has to go into a company. One. Hello.
Sorry, hello.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions in the chat or in the QA feature. So I would like everyone to take a moment and look at the chat to see the links that I've provided to some of the enrichment seminar series and our sponsored events as well. And then I added the contact information for Dr. Linda Petrillo and Dr. Quraishi with the Office of Tech Transfer, along with other team members. And then please, if you could be so kind to complete the satisfaction survey, that link is posted here as well. With that, if we don't have any other questions, Dr. Quraishi?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't think there's any other questions, right? So it would be nice to get out a couple of minutes early and give people a couple of minutes back.
Yes. Well, 5 more minutes and you can go enjoy the rest of your lunch. And thank you everyone for attending our session today. And please contact us if you have any questions about the ICTR resources that are available to you. You can email us through the ICTR-navigator@umaryland.edu, and we're happy to take any questions that you might have. With that, everyone, have a great rest of the day. Thank you.